is a big idea, a new world order.
Your world is not what it seems. Alex Ansary, Outside the Box.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special edition of Outside the Box. It's May 14th, 2010. Tom Horn from the state of Missouri is with me tonight from the website RaidersNewsNetwork.com. Thanks for being here, Tom.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Alex.
Well, I'm glad that we're going to be focusing on one particular topic tonight, and it is transhumanism. This is something that you feature a lot of stories on your website about, you've written about as well in a number of your books. Where would you like to begin in terms of this particular topic, such as, well, for those that don't know, what is transhumanism?
Transhumanism, simply a cultural movement, actually started out as, you might even think of it as a subcultural movement. About 20 years ago. It has grown very quickly. It now is made up of everything from young hippies and old hippies to academia. There are probably members within government, there are members within our universities. Some of our leading law schools are advocating now towards the transhumanist philosophy, and the philosophy is really very simple, that we no longer need to wait on the daunting pace of natural evolution, but we have science now at our disposal, that ever since the mapping of the human genome and the genetic sciences came alive, this vision began basically coalescing into a new religion, a new philosophy that says we can take evolution into our own hands now through rewriting our DNA, genetically altering ourselves, other kinds of science, nanotechnology, neuropharmacology, neurosciences, brain-machine interfacing. All of these sciences now can be viewed as the tool that can lead us to the next step in our evolution, humans 2.0, something better, quicker, faster, cognitively superior, physically superior to what humans are today. And essentially that is what transhumanism is. It's a big idea that we can alter ourselves cognitively and in our physiology and create a superior specimen. And actually the term transhuman is kind of telling because it's transitionary. We are walking away from humans as we know them towards post-humanity. Transhumans are somewhere in the middle. Posthumans will eventually become beings of such radically different cognitive abilities, even physical appearance, post-genderism, where we are the merging of both the best of male and female as part of the transhuman vision, that it'll be so radically different than what we understand today as to no longer even be considered to be human.
One thing that I've come across lately is that there's a lot of people that are starting to pick up on the fact that this stuff was in movies a very long time ago, and it's interesting, not only in movies but books. Take a look at the writings of Philip K. Dick and many other authors. So the future appears to be here now. We're talking about humanity changing as we know it.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, we just did a series of shows in which we also interviewed Dr. James Hughes, which is one of the world's leading transhumanists. He was the president of the World Transhumanist Association. He's now the president of the IEET, the Institute for Emerging Technology and Ethics. And we interviewed him and asked him questions about the new movie Avatar. And if you've seen the film, it carries a tremendous amount of transhumanist themes in it. The Na'vi, the blue aliens, they have a ponytail that's almost something like a USB port, and they can plug themselves into all other kinds of life forms as if they're plugging themselves into some matrixial computer system. He believed, we asked him if he thought that future humans, for instance, might be engineered so as to be more readily adaptable to space travel, which was also some of the other themes in that film Avatar, and certainly he would hold that to be true. So, so in a lot of different areas, things that might impact sociological issues, science and technology, all a part of the transhumanist vision for the future. And people might be amazed. I mean, if you recall, and you probably do, and I think it was in 2006, when George W. Bush, in a State of the Union address, called for legislation to be enacted that would prohibit the creation of human-animal chimeras and other patentable forms of human life. And as soon as Obama became president, he used executive power to remove the restrictions that Bush had put in place so that federal dollars, our tax dollars, could actually start flowing into some of the research that's being hosted in some of these laboratories. Much of it, of course, under the pretense of stem cell sciences, but most of the public doesn't realize that that almost always includes, at least at the embryonic level, the creation of human-animal chimeras.
So this isn't just some theory that you've concocted in your mind and in your imagination. This is factually happening. This attempt to modify life, taking stem cell research to however far they can take it, basically. And that's why, like, your website does tend to document some of these things. But this is something that's not just happening in America, is it? This is something that's fairly global in nature.
It's global in nature, and the amazing parts of it. For instance, there was a press release, a Reuters news story actually, about maybe 5 months ago now, called "Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes." And if you recall, about 24 months ago, the whole embryology discussions, that were going on in the UK, and these scientists were soliciting the government for public funds to fund their research into human-animal chimeras, and the government of the UK was taking so much pressure from parts of the public over the ethics of it, they opened it to kind of a public forum. So you had everybody, you had people that were for it, against it. The Vatican had 2 bishops that were there, and the 2 bishops said, if a woman participates in these experiments by providing eggs or ovum, and then later has a conflict of conscience and decided that she wanted to raise this half human, half animal as her offspring, she ought to have the right to do so. And what the bishops, I think, were illustrating was the tortured ethics, the questions that could arise in what we are now doing literally in thousands of laboratories around the world. Some of the Jewish Orthodox priests weighed in, and they said, well, if this is a part human, part cow, how much of it would have to be human for it to be protected under our laws? And at what point would the integration with the cow then allow us to burn it as a sacrifice? So there is no way to wrap our mind, especially in a Judeo-Christian type culture that has formed the basis of much of our law here in the United States of America, for us to be able to reconcile some of what we're doing. But Alex, we're doing it anyway. I'll bet the public does not know that in 2006, the U.S. Department of Health gave a grant to Case Law School in Cleveland, Ohio of $773,000. There was one purpose behind this. You can go and Google the original news stories and read what the purpose behind the grant was. It was to establish the guidelines and government policy that needs to be enacted for human enhancement, and how the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, for instance, might be extended to protect a human non-human. And so Max Melhelm, who was the professor of bioethics and still is, I believe, at Case Law School, was chosen to lead a team of law professors, bioethicists, genetic engineers, molecular biologists, philosophers, over a 24-month period of time. And the other part of their press release that was astonishing was they said they were going to use actual human test subjects for designing the guidelines around human enhancement as the next step in human evolution. This funded by the U.S. Department of Health. Well, the study ended in 2009. And of course, I had been waiting with bated breath for 24 months because I wanted to know in what way did they use human test subjects to try to develop guidelines around human enhancement, re-engineering humans. No report came forward, and still has not come forward. But here is what I found to be interesting, is that Max Melhelm, immediately at the conclusion of that study, started touring the United States, providing lectures at universities. And there's 2 lectures that he's providing. One is called Directed Evolution, Public Policy and Human Enhancement. And the second is called Transhumanism and the Future of Democracy. And you can go to the Arizona State University, and that second lecture is available right now as a podcast. So as long as it's on their website, you can go and actually listen to the lecture that grew out of public funding. So it's happening at the executive level by presidential allowance. It's happening through the U.S. Department of Health. As you've documented yourself on your show numerous times, the U.S. military is interested in super soldier technology and extended performance warfighter for total battlefield domination, and literally billions of dollars over a decade have flowed. And now you probably saw where the 2011 budget for DARPA includes several $millions for what they call biodesign, which is the purpose of which is to create an immortal organism, and they even want a kill switch put in it in case this thing becomes a lethal force and you know, gets out of Pandora's box.
Meanwhile, Iron Man 2 is out in the theaters, you know, and he's wearing the exoskeleton, so that's another promotional movie for the military. You know, Tom, another thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, just briefly go over this, is what genetically modified food could be doing to our DNA structure, in addition to these attempts to move us into this transhumanistic reality. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these studies that have come out recently, even reaffirming the damage that does to our liver, our kidneys, our organs.
No, that's exactly right. And Alex, we're not going to know for probably a decade, but we are the lab rats when it comes to genetically modified foods. Those tests you're referring to, Arpad Pusztai did tests, which was suppressed by a giant corporation whom I will not name. His research was confirmed by other independent studies. Irina Ermakova did studies, and Greenpeace, as you know, has been involved with other persons who have been suing some of the corporations to try to get this information out into the public, and slowly but surely it's coming out into the public. And the thing was that the tests were done in such a way that they could have actually even been peer reviewed, in that they were done through redundancy. We did a trial, we did it again, and every time we starved rats and then set in front of them genetically modified potatoes and organic potatoes, and then open the door, they'll run to eat the organic potatoes. They don't even want the genetically modified food until there isn't any other option. And then when they eat it, their offspring is developing cancerous tumors. They're half the weight they should be. They're dying at half-life. These are the kind of tests that in the history of the United States would immediately have put the brakes on this technology, but it seems like the FDA now is owned by some of these corporations, actually taking the reports from inside the corporation's own specialists or employees or whatever, who are saying this is not a threat to human health, and yet where the test fields where genetically modified crops are being raised, downwind from these, people are developing respiratory conditions that seem to be above their nation's national averages. There is a significant amount of material that's being suppressed right now, just with genetically modified crops. So then extrapolate what that might mean when we start talking about genetically modified animals and genetically modified humans, who also are going to be now in the environment in the very near future. You could go in, you know, mad cow disease, for instance, developed as a result of cows eating some of their own DNA, eating their own byproducts, a type of cannibalism, and it led to a kind of brain disease. So now imagine in the near future, you're in the restaurant and you're eating goat cheese, and somehow some transgenic goat escaped its environment and has been out there breeding, and now all of a sudden you're consuming human DNA.
Well, I'll tell you, I am not a vegetarian, but I think about it more and more these days when I read about cloned meat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, this isn't safe. I've actually had these arguments with people, Tom, where I'm trying to explain you don't want to be eating cloned cow. They're like, well, at least it's not genetically modified. So have you caught some of the latest reports on where this is going? The last I read was a couple years ago, and they said that they weren't able to trace the semen from the bull once it gets to that point, so it can already be unleashed into our food supply without them being able to detect it, potentially, these cloned meat products.
The problem with it, I mean, when in history have we said we're going to create something and we're going to keep it, your show, out of the box, has some history behind it. I don't care if it's killer bees or anything else we ever did that we said we will be able to contain this. It won't get out of its environment. It reminds me of the movie Jurassic Park, when Ian Malcolm, that Weasley-looking scientist who subscribes to the chaos theory, says nature will find a way. And that is a fact. If we create these products, nature is going to find a way for it to cross over into the natural environment, and when it does, it could lead to a biological nightmare. Imagine what's going to happen with prion contamination information. Imagine what could happen with farm animals. You know, Wired magazine recently ran an article, this may be 6 months ago, 8 months ago now maybe. Anyway, it was called Farm Animals, P-H-A-R-M, Crank Out Drugs. The idea behind it was the pharmaceutical industry wants to create transgenic animals because they can bypass having to go, let's say, to the FDA to get permission for human trials of an experimental drug. Well, the way to get around that and not have to get permission is you create a transgenic animal that's got human DNA, and you can use it as your laboratory to see how those human elements, those parts, are going to respond to this treatment for a particular kind of disease. And you can kind of write around the FDA's guidelines and say, we tested this against human DNA, and it works. So Wired magazine wanted to write an article. The writer for Wired magazine, her name was Elizabeth Svoboda. And she contacted me. She had read an editorial that I had written for WorldNet Daily that was raising caution about some of this. And she said, would you be willing to be part of this article, because she wanted the article to be balanced. And I said, sure. And I sent her a couple pages, maybe 10 different issues in which I thought, you know, caution could be raised. When the article came out, nothing I wrote was included. And I emailed her and I said, Elizabeth, how come nothing I provided was included? And she said, originally it was in the article, but the editors at Wired magazine censored it out because they wanted the article to have more of a positive approach to pharmaceuticals from transgenic animals, meaning that we are actually depriving the public from information that they should have in order to reach a decision in the public forum as to whether there ought to be concerns, and therefore they can pressure their legislators, they can pressure their governments to either not fund or even provide legislation like Bush was calling for to prohibit it. But there was one line that I had used, and I'll say this, then I won't stay on this article issue, but I had said we need to be cautious about tinkering with God's plan. The reason that I knew that my material was originally in the article is because it was a scientist by the name of Vandelavore. And in her material that was left in the article, she said, some people say we shouldn't be tinkering with God's plan. But she said, if we find a cure for cancer through a transgenic animal, nobody's going to be saying you shouldn't be doing that. I wanted to email Mrs. Vandelavore and suggest that she watch the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith, because it actually starts out with that very premise. You have a geneticist on a television show saying we have found the cure for cancer. And the cure for cancer turns out that they blended human and animal DNA, because some animals are more resilient to cancer, and then from that derived a vaccine. And they vaccinated all the world, and everybody celebrates because now we don't have cancer. And then the scene changes, and it's a year or 2 years or whatever down the road, and most of all life on Earth has been wiped out. Why? The unintended consequence of blending humans and animal DNA for a vaccine led to the creation of a human form of rabies, which then would have never been natural to our system, wipes out most of mankind. And that's based on a real scientific possibility.
And that's very amazing that it's sitting there in a Hollywood movie. I think we should talk about that a little bit in a moment. All these Hollywood movies, including Gattaca, which you brought when you came to the studio a couple of years ago. But one quick point, again, back to genetically modified food, fertility rates dropping. And it really becomes a moral discussion for those listening to this. The food that we're eating, not just the fast food, but the stuff that you're getting from Safeway and Fred Meyer, it's not right, and it's doing something to our offspring. And I know there's all this propaganda out there saying there's too many people on the planet, oh, we've got to cull the population. But how is it morally right for them to decide what's in our food and how it's structured?
Yeah, and is there a connection?
And whether or not we can eat, drink raw milk or not. That's another thing. I believe that's a human fundamental right for us to choose our own food.
Right, I do too. Yeah, I mean that's a big issue. The whole fertility rate. They're saying now that it might only be a few decades until basically men are gone from the planet. If some of these rates continue at what they are now. Well, what is causing that? There's also been some suggestion that even the bee die-off could be a result of pollens or whatever that are migrating from genetically modified crops.
Very interesting. So you mentioned I Am Legend, And that definitely was an interesting film. So was Gattaca, and it's basically this premise of a designer baby.
Right.
Hey, look, we can take a look at your baby's DNA, since we have these wonderful DNA databases, and we'll just eliminate and tinker with a few genes so we make sure that your child lives a little bit longer. But when it comes to the end of the day, those with the better genes get the better jobs, hence the better incomes.
Right.
Do you think the future might potentially be going this route?
Oh, I do. And in fact, that, I've debated James Hughes, for instance, on this issue on his own radio show. That it is going to lead to some of what eugenics was hoping to do, and you're trying to lead to an Übermensch, create a superior man. That's the goal. That's the ambition of transhumanism, and so they write about it from a democratic point of view. That's why his lecture, Professor Max Melhem, is talking about transhumanism and the future of democracy, because they're saying we've got to make sure that we don't have inequities. That everybody's going to have some socialized Obama type version of transhuman medicine in the future, so that everybody gets some of the basic benefits of transhumanism. But we know that those who have power, who have influence, who have money, who have authority, they're always going to be the ones who have more of the benefits of human enhancement in this case. And so where you already have a gap right now, that gap is going to dramatically be inflated between the haves and have-nots. But in this case, it's going to be extrapolated to an entirely different level. I mean, if you're a CEO, you own a corporation, and you're trying to remain competitive in the marketplace, and you're competing with CEOs out there who have brain-machine interfacing, they've been enhanced, they can plug themselves in the matrix, they can think, they can process data at 1 billion times faster than us naturals, you know what I mean? And you're trying to stay competitive. Who are you going to hire? That's going to be the future marketplace. Now, imagine the same thing with kids going to school. There are those who want to maintain their humanity for whatever reasons. It might not even be religious reasons. And now these kids go to school. They're always under enormous pressure anyway, especially in grade school, to want to be accepted, to want to be part. And there's the cheerleading squad or whatever, and you want to be a part of it. Now imagine what it's going to mean for these future children who are trying to go into some kind of a public education system, and you have the enhanced and the non-enhanced, and there is going to be no way the non-enhanced can compete. So now they're bringing all this pressure home, and the parents who are trying to maintain their humanity are having to deal with this. It's a nightmarish, Gattaca-like future world that is going to develop. And let me say one other thing. Even some of the transhumanists are saying this. There is a really well-known transhumanist by the name of Hugo de Garis. And de Garis has been doing research for several decades in both publicly and privately funded laboratories, working on the creation of an artificial mind, an artificial brain, something kind of like the Blue Brain Project.
Right.
But he wrote a book called The Artilect Wars, Cosmos versus Terrans. And this book reads almost like it's out of the pages of an apocalyptic piece of scripture somewhere about the Armageddon, if you will, because he's a singularitarian, so he believes, like I do, that if there isn't some intervention somehow, the Earth gets hit by an asteroid or maybe divine intervention or something that stops this, eventually we're going to reach strong artificial intelligence. And when we do, this mind is going to accumulate quickly. All known knowledge, everything that's ever been contributed to every piece of written literature that has been computerized and can be fed into this thing. And Ray Kurzweil's The Age of Thinking Machines is going to start. This thing will think and process data trillions of times faster than anything we know now.
Right.
That the upside, if you're a Kurzweil utopian, the upside is the very near future is going to see the eradication of disease, the vast extension of lifespans, a la Abra de Grey and the Methuselah Foundation, and we're all going to live in a happy, happy, joy, joy world.
A happy, sterile environment.
Yeah, a happy, well, and by the way, it's interesting you mentioned that. Because they not only want to extend life, but they say, well, there's people that would say right now, I don't want to live to be 1,000 years old. Holy smokes, I'm already getting sick of being here. So I'll just take my natural lifespan, thank you very much. So those transhumanists respond back, Oh yes, but we're going to help you with that, because we're through neurosciences, we're learning that the portion of the brain that leads to depression also leads to euphoria, and we're going to learn how to stimulate that, so you'll just be a happy little automaton out there singing little songs and skipping around on the flowers. And
this certainly sounds like some sort of a de facto deal with the devil.
it is.
It sounds good on paper. Hey, we're going to do this, this, and this for you. But if they cared about us so much, why are they poisoning our food, our water, and our air? It just doesn't add up if they really cared about us.
Yeah, well, that's the corporations, and they don't care about you whatsoever. There have been even academic studies that have been done in the last few years that have verified that maybe only 7,000 people in the world actually control the flow of power and revenue. And I don't think, Alex, with all respect, that those people care much about what happens to you or me. To finish what I was saying about Hugo de Garis, he's saying that when the artillects, and this is a term of his invention, artillect, artificial intellect, when it comes online, it's not only going to solve our problems, it's going to start realizing that the earth only has so many resources. And if you start vastly expanding life and curing people of disease, it's not going to take very long unless you sterilize people. It's not going to take very long till you either have to expand China's 1 or 0 child policy, or as in Gattaca, you got to get some kind of a license to have a genetic offspring, or you have to move out into the cosmos. And in Hugo de Garis's mind, this same intellect will, of course, quickly resolve other technological issues related to space travel, colonization, the terraforming, let's say, of moons, whatever, and that it will make sense. Leave the earth to the humans if that's what they want, but us cosmos, that's his other term he invents. These enhanced humans want to move off-world. However, he also makes a good argument that the Terrans, meaning terra, of the earth, terrestrial, the Terrans who want to maintain their humanity don't want to leave the earth and come into conflict with the plan of the cosmos and the artillects. And what Hugo says is that before the end of the 21st century, strong artificial intelligence will put into play a scenario that's going to develop into the next world war and will literally lead to the death of billions of humans before the end of the 21st century. So talk about movies. I mean, this sounds like something right out of the next Terminator.
Well, and it's backed up by mainstream news. For example, in Israel, they have set up their own, they're working on setting up their own artificial intelligence missile defense shield. I'm sure Israel is not the only country. So when the stress of war becomes too great, the machine takes over and the war continues to go on through the dark of night and through the light of day. It's a very frightening type of a future we're looking at. But I agree with what you had said earlier about the potential for this happening unless there's some sort of a cataclysmic event or divine intervention to stop this from happening. Unless that happens, I do see us moving along this. I don't see anything stopping at this point.
Well, and it will and the issue is the world is not ready for it, because if technological singularity actually happens, and we're already using artificial intelligence, even Google uses artificial intelligence. It's just not yet strong artificial intelligence. But when that happens and a synthetic mind comes online, it will literally change things overnight. Overnight, within 1 week maybe. Everything we know will be being changed in terms of everything. Government policy, I think it will immediately lead to a police state, because we will suddenly be faced with a threat that is so beyond our comprehension that we'll be paralyzed with what do we do with this thing now? And if people think that's an exaggeration, the highest think tank at the Pentagon, the Jasons, are concerned about this. There was an article just recently called Jasons Fear Brain-Modified Foes, and they were talking about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, saying that this is the next arms race. That what the Soviet Union and the United States at one time were doing in the buildup of nuclear weapons, the Jasons are saying it's not a matter of whether we think it's ethical to start altering ourselves and enhancing ourselves and building artificial intelligence. We don't have a choice, because if we don't develop it, if we don't get ahead of it, somebody else will. Our enemies will, and then they will subjugate us to their will. And so they're using that as the excuse to say, in every way, super soldiers on the battlefield, artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfacing, whatever, that we've got to get ahead of this technology, or else we're leading to big problems. Another thing, there was a House Foreign Affairs Committee. Did you see this?
No.
A House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing just this last year, 2009. It was held in California. Brad Sherman, Democrat Brad Sherman, chaired this meeting. And now Brad Sherman was picked because he is known for his expertise in the spread of nuclear weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorists. But guess what the conference was about? It was about how do we protect ourselves in the future from transhuman terrorists. Mark Stinsel, who is a writer for Congressional Quarterly, actually attended this and listened to the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing meetings, lectures, and he left there and he said, I've never seen anything like it. He wrote an editorial for CQ saying this sounded more like a script for a Hollywood sci-fi movie. They were talking about superhumans, super intelligence, super animals, and how all of this could very soon become literally a lethal force against which we are absolutely unprepared to deal.
Yeah, and in addition to that, they've also used that argument about we've got to expand these technologies before our enemies get the upper hand. We saw this with Project Paperclip in terms of the Nazis being imported in the United States, or Alan Dulles of the CIA saying the Russians will get these Nazis, rocket propulsion scientists, mine scientists that were involved in early MK Ultra programs before they were relocated here. So that's interesting. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking is that I think why a lot of people aren't aware of some of the things that you're talking about, I think it's obvious people are so bombarded today with the economy, with the fear of not surviving, economic instability around the world. We appear to be on the verge of war with Iran, which could trigger something with China. And so it's interesting to see how much they're preparing for the human species while they have us distracted with all of these other things taking place, and ball games, of course, as well.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I guess a lot of people are probably wondering who's behind this. And I know we only have so much time, but I mean, it definitely looks like a very coordinated, organized intelligence, a very dark intelligence that wants to seize control over the species. And I know there's a lot of theories out there, but there are more people opening up to this idea that fundamentally there's something very, very wrong, and we're in the crosshairs of something.
Yeah, and this is where it begins to borderline, you know, the spiritual, the metaphysical, the supernatural. And interestingly, even among transhumanists, there is the growing belief that this technology could literally lead to the opening of a doorway through which we may make contact with an intelligence that we most certainly are not prepared to deal with. And James Hughes is a Buddhist. There is now a Christian Transhumanist Association. There is a Muslim Transhumanist Association. There's a Mormon Transhumanist Association. And it's yeah, and it's because they too believe that this technology isn't just going to alter us, you know, our biology, but it may even change the definition of soul or spirit, and it may lead to contact with something on the other side. One of the leading transhumanists, Nick Bostrom, actually wrote his thesis, earned his prestigious seat at Oxford University, writing his thesis on transhumanist values. And if you go to his website, nickbostrom.com, and just pull the screen down and click on transhumanist values, he's got his, thankfully, he's got his thesis right online where you can read it. He talks about a great deal of things, but one of the points that he makes is that by merging ourselves with animals, we may be able to open into new modes of perception, because animals can see into areas of the light spectrum, for instance, that we can't see into. And so merging ourselves with them could open new modalities, new sensory modalities. Well, why that's interesting is because, for instance, in the Bible, the story is told of Balaam's donkey. And Balaam's riding down the road, but the donkey can see something he can't see, and that's an angel standing in the middle of the road going to take his head off. So it implies, and of course other studies have been done that show that animals sometimes seem to be reacting to something or afraid of something. A dog barking at something that we can't see seems like there might be something there.
Right before an earthquake, sometimes we see disturbances with the moods of animals, or elephants in Thailand a couple years ago.
That's right. But now, at Arizona State University, where the Templeton Foundation has been funding for the last several years, just a huge line of discussions on transhumanism and the future of democracy. ASU just recently launched a brand new project called the SOFIA Project. And I bet people will be surprised if they go to Arizona State University's website, click on the Sophia project, what they're going to find. Because growing out of this these transhumanist lectures is the idea now that they want to confirm and they want to make contact. That's what this project is about. And then they define what they want to confirm communication with and make contact with. Angels, demons, ghosts, the spirits of the dead, extraterrestrial intelligence, a universal mind, God. The whole list is there. And once again, who is funding the technology that will lead us to humans 2.0 and that whole transhuman future? It's being funded everywhere, in our universities, in our laboratories. It's a global phenomenon, and there's no turning back from it. So where is it going to lead us? I think Hugo de Garis may have it right. It could lead to an Armageddon, literally a battle between the forces that want to maintain humanity and those who want to destroy it.
There's a lot of concern that we are currently witnessing some sort of implementation of Project Bluebeam as well, with these holograms that are being seen in the skies. For example, the pyramid that was rotating above Moscow recently. We've also seen strange craft in China that don't look entirely real or physical, but to the naked eye, they could appear real. So we've also entered this realm of time, Tom, where we can't necessarily trust our own eyes. Some of your thoughts on this explosion, and I'm not saying UFOs don't exist, but this explosion in sightings that aren't necessarily appearing to be completely legit.
No, you know, I've read about Project Bluebeam in the past, and I also know that they've made great advances in holographic imagery. You might remember some of the funding that was the weapon was called the Voice of God. Studies in cyber warfare and cybernetics, psychotronic warfare. And what is interesting now, you know, DARPA had spent a great deal of money developing a particular kind of microchip some years ago that could be implanted intracranially so that then they would be able to control, let's say, a soldier or a person.
The Rambo chip, was this similar to that or a different?
Well, it may have been similar to the Rambo chip, and I can't for the life of me right now remember the name of it, but it doesn't matter. But what is important is that now the technology is leading to extracranial manipulation of brain waves. And DARPA is investing in this heavily to be able, essentially, to put a Wi-Fi bubble.
So there's no chip required.
No chip required.
No chip required.
Well, and how quickly is this technology advancing? There are games makers right now, that Xbox or whatever, that are putting out games where you just put a little rubber cap on your head, and it's reading your brain waves. These are in the stores now, and they're coming this Christmas again. And you can literally play a game by looking at the computer screen and thinking about it. So we have come so far in decoding the neural processes of the brain, the secret language of the brain, that now we can read the signals, and then we can transmit them remotely to a computer that then puts it in computer language, decodes it, puts it in articulate computer language, so that we're telling a game system what we do or do not want it to do just by thinking about it. Well, if games makers are that advanced, imagine how far advanced the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Marines, and other advanced cultures around the world are right now in military technology, being able to remotely access and control, stimulate, and manipulate brainwave activity. So, I mean, the transhumanist looks at this and they say, this is so great. The future home. We'll all have our own little Wi-Fi bubble over the top of our house, and we can do everything. We can change channels, we can turn the lights off at home, we can set the alarm, we can say, hey, telephone, call mom, without even speaking. Furthermore, we're creating a synthetic form of telekinesis, because if we're both wearing the little Bluetooth or whatever of the future that's capable of reading our brain waves, we can look at each other and communicate without ever saying a word. That's real technology that's unfolding right now, and it's so futuristic it's difficult for us to even accept that it could be happening.
The next level of instant messaging.
Yes, that's right. I just sent you a text. Did you receive it? You know.
Ding, you have mail. Well, this opens up another can of worms, if you will. The unleashing of the Pandora's box, the super soldiers of the future. we've been seeing a lot of reports in the last decade, especially in the post 9/11 world, about what these new super soldiers are going to look like. That's why we're seeing movies like Iron Man, Iron Maiden 2. I'm hearing that there's potentially going to be a third. But we are talking about future soldiers. Now, what are some of the characteristics or traits that we're reading about what they would like to develop in the future? I've heard different things ranging from special suits where they can jump over large walls, hit through the walls, and then there's the actual manipulation of course, the human himself, so he has superhuman-like capabilities.
Yeah, well, there again, I mean, you can read DARPA's own budget reports from the past, what has been funded. Certainly they've had an interest in literally rewriting or manipulating the DNA of soldiers. They've already developed go pills, which they can take. In fact, you know, the Olympics ended just recently, and there was, you know, discussions about several of the people in the Olympics that broke records, and there was questions about whether they were using gene doping. They're literally injecting genes into their system that gives them superior strength or stamina or whatever. So there again, if we can do this in the public, if you can go down to your local doctor and get injected with genetics that will somehow help you to perform, and you can't pick it up in your system because it's a natural process. That's a problem. If you were being injected with some kind of steroids, you know, we can make you pee in a cup and we can pick that up and you can get in trouble. Gene doping is a different thing altogether. Well, the go pills that the military has developed for our soldiers are essentially that. It'll help them stay awake for very long periods of time. Interestingly, they also have an interest in diminishing the human trait towards harming another human individual, to make them dull to the sense of killing, so that they literally become killing machines who can fight tirelessly for days on end. We're talking about the manufacturing of the urukai. That's what we're talking about, creating literal killing machines that have been altered genetically for total battlefield domination. But there's also going to be a non-military application of this technology, either by accident or by purpose, and within transhumanism they intend it to be intentional, of course. The Birkbeck Law School, picking up on the House Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, saying we've got to get ahead of this technology because these are going to be future threats on the street, not just overseas on a battlefield. These things are going to be here, and they're going to be powerful, and we have to learn how to deal with them. The Birkbeck Law School, which teaches crime scene analysis, crime scene investigators, recently put out a press release in which they said they're going to have to develop courses for crime scene investigator students in the future to learn how to analyze a crime scene that has been perpetrated by a human non-human. Because let's say that you have a serial rapist, but he's part wolf, or he has some of the genetics of a wolf. Everything about him might not fit our understanding of forensics.
What a freaky possibility.
Our understanding of profiling.
Yeah.
But it's serious enough that the government's actually funding committee hearings on this to prepare for the future.
Wow. It just boggles the mind. And we see movies such as Star Wars, Attack of the Clones, which raises other questions, since we've seen so many things implanted in movies that have later come out in reality, come into manifestation. Could there be some sort of a secret army that they have been preparing for years, grooming for years, underground somewhere with technology that we know nothing about, waiting for that day that they're summoned by the Eye of Sauron, if you will?
Could be. I mean, as exotic as that sounds, we wrote a book, my wife and I wrote a book called The Ahriman Gate, and we wanted the science to be believable. And so we were able to get in contact with a person that works in molecular biology through a friend, a brother actually. And I can't tell you the corporation he works for, but this guy actually holds a patent on a Terminator seed. And he said to me, he said, look, what's happening in genetically modified crops, it's true, and it does pose a public health threat, but he said it is a drop in the bucket. If you were aware, this is what he said, whether he's right or wrong, I don't know, but it sounded believable. And he certainly was in a position to know. He said, if you knew what's happening in Latin America, where the United States has contracts with laboratories, where funding that is beyond congressional review, black budgets essentially, is going for super soldier technology, where these things have been being raised to full maturity. See, that was the debate recently out of the UK. These scientists were saying, we want to know now that we're able to create human-animal chimeras fully up to 50% human-animal integration in the UK. Would the public be willing now to let us have additional funds to take it to the next level, to start raising these to full maturity? And interestingly, part of their argument was it's already being done anyway. Rogue scientists, Dr. Moreau wannabes, they're already doing this. They're already tapping into this technology. But there is a study right now, it's going on at McGill University. The professor that got it started, his name was Ivan Balaban. And what he did was a simple experiment, but it had profound implications for what we're talking about with transhumanism and genetically altered humans. He took brain matter from developing quails, and he put it into the developing brains of chickens, embryonic chickens, and then he grew the chickens, and the chickens exhibited head bobs and vocal trills of quail. And why that was important was he was able to show that complex behavior patterns can be transferred from one species to another species. And the implications behind that via transhumanism and altered humans means when we start blending ourselves with animals, we're not just going to make ourselves stronger. We could literally start altering behavior patterns in very, very complex ways. Humans could start developing a bloodlust for blood like some animals have. I mean, we could literally be talking about lycanthropes. Is that the most insane thing? But then add to that a new field of science through perfecting organ transplantations over the last decade. We've gotten better and better at keeping people alive. And you've probably heard of cellular memory transfer, where people who are having large organs donated and recipients put in their bodies and they're staying alive are suddenly experiencing memories that are not native to them.
Right.
And complex behavior patterns. They suddenly want to smoke menthol cigarettes and they never did before. Or you know, they've always been very conservative, and all of a sudden they want to get involved with every immoral behavior on earth, right? And there's almost 400 case studies now that are making a connection between the donor organ they received and the person who died and left those organs behind. They're actually connecting that some of these memories seem to belong to this person, or the habit that this guy had. He likes to drink a certain kind of beer and smoke a certain kind of cigarette, and all of a sudden this person that never knew him starts developing the same behavior patterns. And what this is saying is that long-term memory storage may not work the way we've historically said, that there's a certain part of the brain, for instance, where long-term memory storage is held.
That's true.
And maybe it's being held in our DNA, which would provide a longer-term template for that memory to be stored. Well, if that's true, Alex, what's going to happen when we start going into the local genetics lab saying, you know, I've always wanted to be part monkey, you know? It's just the superficial way that transhumanism is looking at this, the utopian idea about the future, doesn't even scratch the surface on the exotic, complex, unethical, if I can use that term, issues that we're describing. And yet, as you said, designer children are already being made. This week, a child was born in Britain that has 3 genetic parents.
Really?
This week, scientists are now discussing how they think they can make a third helix. Why only have 2 helixes when we can have a third one? And the third one can take control of the first 2. Those ones that God made aren't quite getting the job done. So we'll create one that man can take control of.
It boggles the mind. There's something else too that I want to see a connection made here, at least to understand how we got from Nazi Germany to this point. We saw the implementation of eugenics. Even before Nazi Germany became a vehicle of tyranny throughout Europe. Eugenics, thanks to Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, I believe, already had this philosophy spreading throughout Europe, those that are the higher class and those that are the lower class. And all of a sudden, 50, 60 years later, transhumanism is being talked about on a regular basis. I just look at Wired magazine today. So how did we get from eugenics to transhumanism? Is there a connection here with some of the same powerful either banking families or bloodlines? How did we get from that to where we are today?
Yeah, certainly could be. Obviously, eugenics was, the whole idea was to create a superior bloodline, improve the human gene pool by encouraging breeding among those families that you're talking about, some of the wealthy Europeans and whatever, while at the same time discouraging breeding among, the unwantables. And if we couldn't discourage them from breeding, then for a long time we would simply sterilize them, and we'd write laws around why we were doing it.
Right, just 70 years ago, 80 years ago, there'd be a picture of someone, and based on the size of their jaw, the size of their nose, particular ethnic groups within Italy, these are more likely to be rapists or killers based on how they look, correct?
Right, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a piece of our history, again, that most Americans don't realize that even up until recent history. I think in the 70s, the last of these laws were actually being taken off the textbook. And I would tell you that people like James Hughes, other leaders within transhumanism, that's why they talk about democracy. They don't have an interest in seeing the kind of selective extermination that was being practiced in Germany. But it still is wishful thinking. It is still going to lead to a classification of haves and have-nots, a classification of people, and the divide between the human races, is going to be deepened by those who have the opportunities of human enhancement.
Now, I want to ask you your thoughts on China. Do you see any specific reason why China's been involved also in this push to expand the limits of what is physically possible in terms of transhumanism? I mean, you just got done talking about organ harvesting, and they've obviously had a lot of experience harvesting the organs of the Falun Gong there. Your thoughts on China today and its part in this?
Well, I'm not an expert on China, and I have private thoughts about why they would be so interested in continuing to invest in our own fiat currency, and how that in the very near future may give them a dominant role in almost setting policy for the way, foreign policy at least, the way it will be written and the way it will be conducted, wars that we may fight. But with regard to their mores, their values, at least from the government side, as it is imposed downward upon the population, is not like ours historically have been, in that they don't value life in the same way that we do. Their one-child policy, their willingness to harvest organs from prison inmates, allow those to be sold in a kind of a black market operation, and they have been investing in technologies that will lend itself to transhumanist aspirations.
We've also forced many church members underground as well.
Forced church members underground. So, what role will they play? I think everybody realizes now that whatever the future is, unless something radically changes, China is going to be somewhere in a dominant role, taking advantage of whatever the technologies are, whatever the currencies are. And I just have I'm not an expert in this field. I have a very strange feeling, though, about what's happening right now with regard to the Titanic of us printing money we don't have, and China continuing to invest in owning the debt of the United States, and how at some point in the near future the walls really could crumble down around us. Why does China want to own so much debt? Well, because it can be paid in territory. Even our own president has said this in the past, that when you only have 5% or 10% of the gold in Fort Knox that you need to stand behind how many dollars you've printed, and China has come in and they bought all of this debt of the United States, and all of a sudden your economy goes to collapse, how are you going to pay China back for what they've invested in? The only gold you got left is territory, it's land. And so you start surrendering large pieces of the United States to somebody who essentially can foreclose on you. Now, of course, that would probably lead to a war, unless it happens over a period of time. Drip, drip, drip. Give us all enough time to get used to it as it unfolds.
Or if our own government is in on this, that could be the point where the foreign troops are called in, the peacekeepers. If there's some sort of agreement where, well, there's a massive level of debt that's in the multi-trillions, here is this chunk of land in, say, off the coast of Oregon, perhaps,
Yeah,
or
who
maybe
wants
off the
that?
coast of California. Obviously, there's going to be uproar if that were to take place.
Yeah, how it relates to transhumanism. See, you're the expert on this, and as I understand it, maybe it's a secret. You probably will be producing a film at some point in the future on this, and I can't wait to see it. But I'm certainly not the expert that you are on that matter.
Well, hopefully, when I get the film done, it'll shed some light on this and hopefully connect some new dots. But I think a lot of these things that we're talking about are coming together at this particular point in time, where there are many different particular challenges and outcomes. And I think really it's a matter of how we respond to these challenges that'll dictate what the future really holds. I mean, on a philosophical note, I think there's some things that might potentially be predestined, but yet there is still potentially an ability to change some of this if we were to get active, if we were to start speaking out against these things.
Yeah, and you know, to that end, I mean, I have to tell you, as an old guy, I'm really happy with some of what I'm seeing happening here in the United States right now. The Tea Party movement, the counterculture movement. See, I remember the days of the hippies. I was a hippie. Can you imagine that? I had hair down to here. And I still recall my buddies, you know, out in the middle of the road, come on, Tom, let's go to Woodstock. Well, this was certainly just a ragtag group of kids, but it started happening everywhere. It was Haight-Ashbury.
You went to Woodstock?
Huh? I didn't get to go, no. But I'm saying I remember them in the middle of the road saying, "Come on," and I couldn't go. Oh, you got to be there. Well, I wish now I would have went. But the point is, it was a cultural phenomenon. It was a grassroots awakening. You couldn't have manufactured it, and it certainly wasn't the established power structures that were making this happen.
No, I don't
And
believe
and
that.
my entire adult life, I have been waiting for a moment. I've been out there like you, Alex. I've been out there sometimes preaching to I don't know who, wondering if anybody's even listening. I remember when I preached the Religious Broadcasters Convention 1991, and I said, if Americans don't wake up and teach their kids how to think, we will have a dictator in this country within 10 years. Well, that fell like a lead balloon. All these evangelicals sitting out there like, oh my gosh, is he back on that again? Come on, let's get to Denny's. I want to eat some breakfast. So many years I've been waiting, and all of a sudden, just kind of like from out of nowhere, you've got a patriotic movement in this country, and it's happening, and it's spontaneous. And what's hilarious is as the Democrats try to own it, the Tea Party movement, and I'm not just talking about the Tea Party movement, but that puts a face on what I mean by this grassroots movement. They don't want the Democrats to own them. So now the Republicans come in and they put 2 or 3 of their speakers out there on the platform and they try to take ownership of it. And but the movement is still rebelling against that because it's not a one-party movement. It's much bigger than that. We have a problem in our government. And if we are going to stop the path that we're on, we better do it now. We may be the last generation and the last hope. Well, for whatever reason, the hippies believed that they could make a difference. If for 1 minute they would have thought about it, they'd have probably gave up. But they were too dumb, if you will, to know that they couldn't make a difference, and they were too energized to believe that they couldn't make a difference. And I'm using dumb tongue-in-cheek. That was what the establishment thought of them. But they did make a difference. They changed executive law. They brought home.
We'll go and cut that. Go ahead, Tom.
Are we out of time?
Well, we're going to keep it going, I think, for about a good half hour or so. Probably continue on here.
Well, how long have we been here? What time is it?
We got about 1 hour in. We could I can edit that part.
Okay.
So we can go ahead and treat this as a break then, Bill. Okay, so how much longer do you think? Well,
she's got us on a schedule. We're actually supposed to be at McMinimans.
3:43.
Oh, we're good for a few minutes.
Okay.
You're good for more like a 10-minute wrap-up?
Okay,
Let's do a 10-minute wrap-up.
Okay.
Where were we? Okay, you heard that, Bill? That we're wrapping this up in the next 10, so pick up where you left off at.
What was I saying?
I have no clue. Though you were talking about grassroots movement, and then, yeah.
Oh, these just a young ragtag group of kids, hippies, musicians, but they became very interested in social issues. So, you've got, at Woodstock, you've got country Joe McDonald or whatever singing, pick up your gun, we're going to have a whole lot of fun. It's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me. I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam. And saying such caustic things. You can be the first one on your block to have your son brought home in a box. They were just in your face with their attitude about what the government had done, getting us embroiled in a war that we never should have been in the first place, or at a minimum, we should have at least gave the armament support and backup to get the war won, not put them there and then start cutting off their funding and making a big political issue. This is what politicians always do, and it always burns me that we put soldiers in harm's way and then we start, doing the political two-step, testing the air. And of course, we've had generals on the battlefield that have come in conflict with our own presidents over issues like this and drew a line in the sand. Well, in any case, I've been waiting. I've been waiting and waiting year after year after year, and there is something now that is happening, and I love it. I don't even really know where it's going, but I love the attitude behind it. And what I would tell every young person out there that's listening to this, not to listen to their government right now. When they start trying to stereotype you as being unpatriotic because you're willing to stand up and challenge the status quo from the establishment or from the government, that is baloney. Patriotism is exactly what they're doing. Patriotism is standing up in defense. When we broke away from a dictatorship known as Great Britain and came here, that's what we fought and died for. Our liberty, our freedom, the right to say what I want to say. Obviously, restrictions. You don't run into a giant building screaming fire, fire, where somebody's going to get hurt. But I love what's happening, Alex, and it's your generation. To me, it is the coolest thing I have seen in a very long time. I'm glad that people are finally waking up, and they're not going to take it anymore. Well, that's a very good thing.
This is a very unique time to be alive. Instead of looking back at the past, wishing that it was late 60s again, which some people do, I don't believe that in this car of life, in this journey of life that we're on, that we could spend our lives looking in the rearview mirror. We can only go forward. And as we talked about earlier with the potential future, it's like being in a semi going 90 miles an hour and there's a cliff ahead, and unless we turn that wheel and go either left or right, we're not going to avert crashing over the cliff. And so that's definitely how it feels right now. This is actually much more critical than the late 60s.
And thankfully, you have many more tools. In the 60s, not even very many people had a television. Look at what we have now. We've got Twitter, Facebook,
YouTube,
the internet.
Right.
You're here doing a television show. So your generation has a phenomenal opportunity now.
It feels like a blessing, to be honest with you.
It is a blessing.
What I have and the ability to even do this show here with not a lot of money, it feels like a blessing.
It is a blessing, and I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm glad that actually you've been out there for years ahead of a lot of people your age. You've been a groundbreaker. You've been a way paver, and thankfully you have. And now a lot of others are following you, and I'm glad they are.
Thank you. Well, Tom, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, Alex.
What can we expect from you in the future? Future speaking engagements, websites that you'd like to promote, things you've got coming up?
Well, people can continue to go to Raiders News Network every day, and if they keep coming back, they'll realize we're not really as radical as we first appear to be, and frankly, they may learn something about the future of technology, transhumanism, where we're going. We're working on another book right now. We're working on a new national conference. Actually just chaired a meeting in which we got the movers and shakers to agree with us. It's going to be happening out of Branson, Missouri. Be a lot more information forthcoming about that in 2011. Also, there's a new artist movement called Artist Expressway, and they can go to YouTube right now and type in Tea Party National Anthem or something like that, or go to artistsexpressway.com and see one of the first YouTubes up there called Freedom. And here again, it's artists who are taking the very issues that you're talking about, but they're not talented to do television. Their talent is singing or playing an instrument. And even the artist community is starting to wake up and saying, this is the talent we have, and we can use this to make a very social, positive piece of commentary right now. And the whole song Freedom is, you're not going to shut me up, you're not going to back me down, and you're not going to take away the future of my child.
Well, it's not just about this new renaissance. I think we're going to be doing it one way. Humanity's too unique for that. There's a number of different ways we can express our creativity and imagination, and I think that's exactly what we're doing. So I'd like to thank you again for coming on. Have a good, safe trip back. For those that will want to learn more about Tom Horn, Google him, and YouTube and Google, and on the internet, you'll find a lot of information as well. Also check out his new book, Apollyon 2012, also very interesting stuff. Until next week, I'm Alex Ansary, reminding you that the path to the ultimate truth still starts in one place, and that's within. Stay safe. Good night.